What if I told you that every single person you meet is wearing a mask, and that Carl Jung discovered a way to see through it in a matter of moments? Imagine sitting across from someone you thought you knew, a friend, a colleague, maybe even a lover, and realizing that what they show you is only a fragment of who they really are. What if beneath the surface there is something hidden, something so fundamental that even they themselves cannot see it? Stay with me, because once you hear this, you will never look at people the same way again. We like to believe we're good at reading others. We think we can judge character, sense intentions, predict behavior. But Jung shattered that illusion. He said that everything that irritates us about others, if we dare to look closely, is a mirror reflecting a truth about ourselves. The unsettling part is this: our true character is not revealed in the stories we tell about our lives, not in our victories or even our failures, but in something much subtler, something that slips through in moments when we least expect it. Jung spent over 50 years listening to the human soul, mapping its symbols, its contradictions, its hidden rooms. He discovered that every one of us carries a persona, a carefully crafted mask that allows us to move through society, to be accepted, to belong. But beneath that mask lives what he called the shadow, the parts of ourselves we deny, repress, or exile into darkness. And here's where it gets fascinating. As long as we are calm, collected, and in control, we can maintain the mask. We can appear the way we wish to be seen. But there are two very specific triggers, two psychological cracks that make the mask fall away. And Jung's two questions were designed to pierce straight into those cracks. Why are they so powerful? Because they bypass the surface mind and dive straight into what Jung called unconscious complexes, the hidden forces that pull our strings from behind the curtain. He once warned, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. That is why these two questions matter. They are not just clever tricks to expose others. They are doorways into the truth of human nature and into yourself. Jung mapped the human psyche into layers. There is the persona, the mask we show the world, the ego, our conscious self, the personal unconscious, which contains forgotten memories and repressed experiences, the shadow, where we banish the parts of ourselves we cannot accept, and deeper still, the collective unconscious, where timeless human patterns live, the archetypes we all share. Most people spend their lives dancing between persona and ego, never realizing that when the right trigger strikes, those deeper layers erupt to the surface. Jung discovered two exact conditions where this eruption is guaranteed. The first has to do with projection. Every human being, without exception, projects onto others the traits they cannot bear to see in themselves. We think we are describing someone else, when in reality, we are sketching a portrait of our own denied self. The second is ego inflation. The moment our identity is challenged, whether by humiliation or by being placed on a pedestal, our mask slips and our truer self comes spilling out. These two forces, projection and ego inflation, are what Jung used to reveal character more clearly than years of observation ever could. And this is where his questions come in. The first question is deceptively simple. What kind of person can you absolutely not stand? At first glance, it sounds like a casual conversation starter. But Jung would have told you to pay attention to every single word of the answer, because this is not really about the other person. It is about the speaker's own shadow. When someone tells you the type of person they despise, they are unknowingly handing you a map of their own blind spots. Jung noticed something uncanny. The more passionate, angry, or emotional someone became while describing what they hated, the more certain it was that those very qualities lived inside them. If a person said, "I cannot stand liars," Jung would ask, "And where have you lied to yourself? Where have you twisted the truth and buried it?" If they said, "I hate selfish people," he would hear, "This is a person who has suffocated their own needs for so long that when they see others express theirs, it triggers rage." If they said, "I despise weakness," he knew he was looking at someone terrified of their own fragility, someone who had built an identity of strength precisely because their hidden self felt so vulnerable. This is why the question is so revealing. The shadow does not only contain what we think of as bad, it also contains everything we have pushed away, even positive qualities like joy, confidence, or tenderness. Jung met people who claimed they couldn't stand show-offs or overly cheerful people, only to discover they themselves had buried their own vitality, their own radiance. The shadow is not just darkness. It is everything about yourself you could not yet bear to own. And so, when you ask this first question and listen carefully, you are not really learning about others. You are listening to the echoes of their rejected self. Jung said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. And that understanding, if we have the courage to follow it, can change everything." But the second question cuts even deeper. It goes beyond irritation, beyond dislike. It goes to the fragile center of who we believe we are. And the way a person answers it will reveal something about their soul that no performance, no mask can disguise. The second question Jung used is this: "Tell me about a time when you were absolutely certain you were right, and then discovered you were wrong." It sounds innocent, but if you sit with it for even a moment, you'll feel how destabilizing it really is. To admit being wrong cuts straight into the heart of our identity. Our sense of self rests on the belief that we understand reality, that we can navigate life with some degree of competence. To be wrong is to admit a crack in that structure. And how a person responds to that crack, Jung realized, reveals more about their character than almost anything else. Think of it this way: when we are right, we are in control. We shine. We feel validated. Our ego is fed. But when we are wrong, when our certainty crumbles, something deeper comes to the surface. For some, it is rage. They attack the messenger. They lash out. They project blame onto anyone else. For others, it is denial. They twist reality until it bends back into a shape that keeps their pride intact. And for still others, it is shame. They collapse inward, crushed by the belief that their worth as a human being has dissolved with the mistake. Jung noticed a pattern. The ego, when threatened, deploys defense mechanisms like a cornered animal. Denial, rationalization, projection, trivialization. Each is a way of saying, "It wasn't me. I wasn't really wrong. It doesn't matter." But for the rare individual with genuine strength of character, something else happens. They pause. They breathe. They acknowledge the mistake without letting it destroy their self-image. They hold what Jung called the tension of the opposites, the ability to admit imperfection without collapsing into despair. Why does this matter so much? Because our relationship to error is really our relationship to truth itself. A person who cannot tolerate being wrong is enslaved to their illusions. They are building their life on sand because the moment reality contradicts them, their foundation crumbles. A person who can only react with shame has confused being mistaken with being worthless. But the person who can say, "Yes, I was wrong, and here is what I learned," is not just resilient. They are free. Jung went further. He observed that people who cannot name a single moment when they were wrong are living in dangerous denial. He called this psychological inflation, when the ego expands so much that it loses touch with reality. These are the people who seem unshakably confident, who insist on their perfection, who never bend. But Jung warned, such rigidity often precedes collapse. Life has a way of breaking what refuses to bend. Others respond differently. When asked about being wrong, some people immediately blame external circumstances. The weather, other people, bad luck, anything but themselves. Jung said this revealed what he called an external locus of control. Such people drift through life as if everything happens to them, not through them. They rarely take responsibility, and so they rarely grow. And then there are the defensive ones. You've probably seen it: the instant irritation, the crossed arms, the sudden shift in energy. Jung said this response signals a fragile self, built entirely on being right. To such a person, admitting error feels like annihilation. They would rather destroy relationships, deny reality, even betray themselves, than confront that wound. But then there are those rare souls who answer differently. They describe a moment when they were wrong, and instead of bitterness or shame, their voice carries reflection. They explain what they learned, how it changed them. And when Jung saw this, he recognized what he called integration, the ability to weave together both light and shadow, both success and failure, into a whole self. These people were not perfect, but they were real. Jung said, "Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens." These two questions work precisely because they force us inward. The first reveals the shadow through what we project onto others. The second reveals our ego's fragility through how we face our own fallibility. Together, they uncover the architecture of a person's inner life, their hidden fears, their repressed desires, their true relationship with themselves. But Jung did not stop there. He realized that people fall into distinct patterns depending on how they answer. The inflated ego type, those who project their flaws onto others and refuse to admit mistakes. They often appear powerful, but underneath, they are the most insecure. The self-deprecating type, those who constantly confess mistakes and claim to hate traits they secretly possess. Their apparent humility masks a defense mechanism, a way to avoid deeper confrontation. And then the integrated type, the rare individuals who can recognize their projections, acknowledge their errors, and remain whole. Jung called this psychological health, integration, the long and difficult journey of becoming a complete human being. Now here's where Jung's intuition becomes almost frightening in its accuracy. Once you understand a person's pattern, you can predict their behavior with astonishing precision. Why? Because people are not as unpredictable as they seem. They may change scenery, roles, relationships, but the same psychological script repeats itself again and again. A person who blames others when wrong will blame in every sphere of life. A person who projects weakness onto others will forever surround themselves with weak people to despise. And the integrated ones, though few, carry with them a rare consistency, a steady wholeness that makes them trustworthy, magnetic, deeply human. But Jung's discovery came with a warning. These two questions don't just reveal, they also transform. When you ask them sincerely, something shifts. Because to answer truthfully is to touch the shadow and to expose the fragile ego. And once exposed, things cannot remain the same. Jung compared the meeting of two souls to a chemical reaction. If there is a reaction, both are transformed. And so, you must be careful. For in asking these questions of others, you cannot avoid facing them yourself. And that may be the most unsettling and the most liberating part of all. There is something else Jung discovered, something he called the warning signs. When he asked these questions, certain answers carried a kind of heaviness, a signal that something dangerous lurked beneath the surface. He realized that when the mask cracks, what spills out is not always harmless. It can reveal fractures in the soul. And if you recognize these signs, you begin to see people not as they wish to appear, but as they truly are. The first warning sign is projection that becomes obsessive. Mentally healthy people can see both light and shadow in everyone. But if someone projects all negative traits onto one single group, one gender, one race, one political party, one profession, Jung said this was no coincidence. It revealed a dangerous psychological split, a refusal to integrate their own shadow. What they reject outside of themselves, they are desperately trying to keep buried within. Such people are at war, not only with the world, but with themselves. The second warning sign is the denial of fallibility. If someone insists they have never been wrong about anything important, Jung called this psychological inflation, a ballooning of the ego so detached from reality that collapse is inevitable. These are the people who move through life with an aura of invincibility, who cannot admit error even in the face of undeniable evidence. Jung saw this often before great personal crises. The politician who falls, the leader who loses everything, the parent who alienates their family. When you refuse to bend, life eventually breaks you. The third sign is a sudden change of energy when speaking about what they hate. Pay attention to this. Jung did. He noticed that when someone's entire body shifts, when their eyes harden, when their voice sharpens or grows louder, they are not simply giving an opinion. They have touched a live wire of the psyche, a shadow complex that still controls them. The stronger the reaction, the deeper the repression. It's as if a piece of the unconscious has surged to the surface, desperate to be noticed, and they are fighting to push it back down. The fourth sign is immediate deflection or aggression. Jung saw that when some people were asked these questions, they would instantly turn them back, often with hostility. Why don't you answer it first? Why are you asking me this? This rejection, Jung discovered, is often the most revealing sign of all. It shows that you've struck right at the heart of their shadow. The very act of refusing the question is a defense mechanism protecting the most sensitive truth. These warning signs matter because they separate those who are capable of growth from those who are trapped in their own illusions. And Jung knew this distinction wasn't just academic. It was practical. Because once you can read these signs, you see them everywhere. In relationships, in families, in workplaces, in leaders. Think of intimacy. Most people believe love means accepting the persona, the mask our partner presents. But Jung taught that true intimacy only begins when you recognize the shadow beneath. When you understand your partner's projections, when you witness how they handle being wrong, you glimpse their real psychology. And in that glimpse, something rare can happen: authentic closeness. Not the closeness of masks touching, but the raw, sometimes uncomfortable honesty of two souls truly seen. In business and work, the same applies. Jung found that most workplace conflicts aren't about the official reasons people give: budgets, deadlines, decisions. They are about projections colliding. One person projects weakness, another projects arrogance, and soon a simple disagreement becomes a battlefield. To recognize this is to cut through the noise. It allows you to see what is really happening, to stop fighting shadows, and start addressing the human heart beneath them. In parenting, Jung's insight was revolutionary. He believed that children don't simply inherit their parents' genes. They absorb their parents' unconscious. When a parent lives in denial of their own shadow, the child often carries it instead. But when a parent models self-reflection, when they can say, "I was wrong. I lost my temper. This is my shadow, not yours," the child learns a different way of being. They grow up not crushed by projections, but empowered by honesty. Jung believed this was one of the greatest gifts a parent could give, the permission to be whole. And in leadership, perhaps more than anywhere else, Jung's questions matter, because leaders hold the power to magnify either persona or authenticity. Those who lead without examining their own shadow inevitably manipulate, exploit, and wound. Their need to appear flawless blinds them to reality, and their inability to admit mistakes destroys trust. But leaders who face their shadow and their fallibility create spaces where others can do the same. Jung believed this was the essence of authentic leadership, not charisma, not authority, but the courage to be human in full view of others. But perhaps the most unsettling discovery Jung made is this: people who become skilled at reading others often fall into a trap. They use their insight as a shield, dissecting everyone else while avoiding themselves. They become voyeurs of the psyche, pointing fingers outward while refusing to look inward. And Jung warned that this is the greatest danger of psychological knowledge. It can become another mask, another way to hide from the self. He said, "Your task is not to seek love, but to find all the barriers within yourself that you have built against it." The same is true of self-knowledge. Your task is not to analyze others endlessly, but to confront the barriers you have built against truly knowing yourself. These two questions were never meant to be weapons against others. They were meant as mirrors, harsh, unflinching mirrors held up to your own soul. So let me ask you directly, who is the person you cannot stand? And when was the last time you were absolutely sure you were right, only to discover you were not? If you feel a resistance rising in your chest right now, that is no accident. It is your shadow stirring. It is your ego trembling. And if you dare to sit with those feelings, if you refuse to turn away, you will discover that these questions are not small tricks of psychology. They are doorways to transformation. Here is the truth Jung uncovered after decades of listening to the depths of human souls. These two questions are not simply diagnostic tools. They are catalysts. When honestly answered, they don't just reveal a person's character. They change it. Because the very act of looking inward, of naming the shadow, of facing the sting of being wrong, begins what Jung called individuation, the lifelong process of becoming your authentic self. But this transformation comes with a choice. Once you see someone's shadow, you can use it to manipulate them. And many do. Advertising, politics, even personal relationships often exploit unconscious weaknesses to gain control. But Jung warned that manipulation is a poison. It corrupts not only the one being manipulated, but also the one who manipulates. To exploit another's shadow is to lose touch with your own soul. The alternative is understanding, to see the shadow not as a weapon, but as an entry point into deeper compassion. When you understand that someone's anger is rooted in fear, their arrogance in insecurity, their coldness in buried grief, something shifts. You stop being surprised by human flaws. You stop taking them so personally, and instead of judgment, you begin to respond with clarity. and sometimes even love. But here is the most important twist. These questions are not just for others. They are mirrors you must eventually turn toward yourself. Because when you judge another's projections, you reveal your own. When you analyze how someone else deals with being wrong, you are forced to confront your own relationship with truth and fallibility. Jung's wisdom was never about controlling others. It was about freeing yourself. He said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to a better understanding of ourselves." This is not a polite proverb. It is a challenge, a call to courage. Because to truly understand yourself, you must be willing to stand in front of those mirrors without flinching. Think for a moment about the people who trigger you most: the arrogant, the passive-aggressive, the victim, the ruthless climber. Jung would whisper, "These are not random annoyances. They are reflections of you, not necessarily in the literal traits, but in the energies you have disowned. The arrogance you despise may point to a buried pride you have never dared to own. The victimhood you mock may echo your own unspoken helplessness. The ruthlessness that disgusts you may mirror a hunger for power you have forced into silence." This is the paradox of the shadow. The people who irritate us most are our teachers. They carry back to us the pieces of ourselves we have lost. To deny them is to deny ourselves. To acknowledge them is to begin to reclaim our wholeness. The second mirror is even harder. Recall a moment when you were wrong, truly wrong. Not about a detail, but about something that mattered. How did you react? Did you justify, blame, deny, collapse? Or did you breathe, admit, and learn? This question cuts because it exposes the fragile scaffolding of the ego. And yet, if you can sit with it honestly, it frees you. You begin to see that being wrong is not the end of dignity, but the beginning of wisdom. This is why Jung's questions matter so much, because they collapse the illusions we cling to and invite us into reality. And reality, however painful at first, is always the ground of transformation. Think about how this changes your view of people. Suddenly, the colleague who frustrates you is no longer a monster. They are fighting the same inner battles you are. The family member who drives you mad is defending against the same wounds you also carry. Even the stranger who behaves in ways you cannot fathom is simply another human trying to manage the unbearable tension of being alive. This does not mean you excuse harmful behavior. Boundaries are necessary, but it means you stop living in judgment. You begin living in understanding, and from that understanding grows something rarer than knowledge: compassion. And yet Jung left us with a warning. The most frightening thing is not to see others clearly. The most frightening thing is to see yourself clearly. Because once you face your shadow, once you admit your fallibility, you can no longer pretend. You can no longer live behind the mask of persona. You must live awake, and that is both terrifying and liberating. He said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." That privilege is earned not through achievements, but through honesty, brutal, unrelenting honesty with yourself. It is earned by asking, who do I despise and why? When was I wrong and what did it reveal? And then daring to sit with the answers, even when they tear through the image you've built of yourself. So here is the challenge I leave with you, the challenge Jung left with all of us. Before you apply these questions to others, ask them of yourself. Who is the person you cannot stand? And what does that say about your shadow? When were you certain you were right, but discovered you were wrong? And what does that reveal about your relationship to truth? Do not rush the answers. Let them disturb you. Let them linger. Because in that disturbance lies the seed of transformation. The shadow you fear may hold the very qualities you need. The mistakes you dread may carry the wisdom you are missing. Every encounter, Jung said, is like the meeting of two chemical substances. If there is a reaction, both are transformed. Perhaps this video has been your chemical reaction. Perhaps it has stirred something, unsettled something. If it has, do not run. Follow it, because that discomfort is the path back to yourself. And if you take nothing else from Jung's work, remember this: before you can truly understand anyone else, before you can predict their behavior or see through their mask, you must dare to turn those two simple questions inward. The answers will not flatter you, but they will free you. For the journey is not about becoming perfect. It is about becoming whole. And that, Jung believed, is the deepest purpose of being alive. Thank you for walking with me through this exploration. If these words resonated, share them with someone who needs to hear them. And remember, the irritation you feel toward others, the mistakes you cannot bear, the shadows you hide, these are not curses. They are invitations. Invitations to awaken, to integrate, to become, at last, who you truly are.